Evil eye, curse, or other planets messing with you. Let's talk about it. In my prior video, I already talked about signs of curses, but let's talk about the astrological signs and how you can figure that out. Now, first things first, go to Astro and pull your chart just for your information. This is not a real person. I just pulled up a random chart for this example. And the reason I like Astro is it actually gives you more information, which I'm going to show you in a second. But yeah, go to Astro transit chart, put in your information, and then let's take it from there. Now, look on the outside orange, those are your transits, and then obviously on the inside, those blue sign symbols, that's your birth chart, right? Also, please pull it in whole sign houses. That is a lot better. I'm gonna tell you now what to look for in your chart, and obviously this could be super complicated, but I'm just gonna give you some basics, and I do believe that even just with that, you will get an idea if that's what's causing your problems. Okay. First things first, let's start with finding the malefic in your chart. So to find the malefic in your chart, we got to figure out if you have a day chart or a night chart. So you see how the houses are divided, and you have the horizon, which is the horizontal line between the 12th and 1st house, and then between the 6th and 7th house on the right hand side. If your sun is above that line, you're born during the day, you have a day chart. If your sun is below the line, you're born at night, you have a night chart. In this example, it's easy to see the person would have a day chart because the sun is in the 11th house, right? Like right up there. Now, that means that the malefic in this chart is Mars. If the sun were, for example, in the 3rd house in Sag, that would be a night chart in this case. And the malefic would be Saturn. Both malefics can do damage in your life, of course, but it is important to understand which one is your malefic because that damage could be worse, right? And more obvious. Now, regardless, I want you to keep that in mind, but I still want you to look at both anyways. So look at hard aspects, which are oppositions and squares because they're considered difficult, but I also want you to look at conjunctions. And I know a conjunction isn't good or bad by itself, but since it's an amplifier, and if there's a malefic involved and it's directly on another planet of yours, yeah, it can fuck shit up. So if you aren't as well versed yet in reading your chart by itself, this is why I wanted you to pull on astroseek.com, because if you scroll down, it gives you the transit chart and it shows you which aspects it is making, so you don't even have to be able to read those. And again, pay attention to the oppositions, the squares, and the conjunctions where the malefics are involved, okay? So for example, in this chart, you can read that that person's Mars, which is the malefic in that chart, is actually conjuncting Mars. So can you imagine two malefics on top of each other? Not good, right? Now I want you to look at the houses, and you don't have to be able to know all of this by heart. Just look up the house associations and then really start putting the story together and see if that makes sense for you. And that may explain you a lot of where your troubles come from right now. So maybe you're not cursed. For example, as I pointed out earlier, this person has a pretty difficult Mars transit going on in the 11th house, right? The 11th house is actually super positive, and it's all about networks, friends, also social media is the 11th house. So now two malefics on top of each other is especially difficult, speaking from experience here. So yeah, think about it. What could that mean? Problems with friends, with that person's network, problems with or that arise from social media. Just fill it out for yourself and see if that gives you an answer that makes sense for your life, and it will show you. So maybe you're not cursed, maybe it's really just that transit, and the beauty of it is then you can go back and Google when did that transit start, and of course the closer the orb, the more intense this is going to feel. For example, in this chart, this is exact, right? Or almost exact, because yeah, it's within 2 degrees, which is incredibly close. So this is gonna feel really, really intense. And fun fact about me, I actually had a very similar transit with Mars on Mars just recently, and yeah, it's no joke. But another thing I want to talk about is retrogrades. We all know that Mercury retrograde can be difficult, and Mercury retrograde, I think everyone knows about it at this point, but other retrogrades in my personal opinion, can be much worse. But of course, it depends on everyone's chart as well, right? But for example, Venus retrograde can be brutal because, yeah, people always think about love and relationships when it comes to Venus, but Venus is also finances, right? So when Venus is retrograde in a financial house, it can be pretty bad. Then Mars retrograde they just suck because Mars is all about moving forward in action. So when Mars is retrograde, that in itself will have some kind of negative effect usually. And I'm not saying that to scare anyone, right? But that's just from what I've seen. But another thing to keep in mind is when we're thinking of, causing issues, and I'm only talking about the traditional planets here because with planetary magic, that's all about the 7 traditional planets. That is not about Uranus and Pluto and those. And that's why I'm leaving those out here, and I just want you to mainly focus on those. Another thing to keep in mind when you're trying to figure out what's actually happening is that Mars and Saturn are very, very different. Mars, again, is about action. It also rules things like sex, passion, right? But it's all about moving forward, but it's also explosive. So explosive fights, right? Or like you injuring yourself. I don't know, car accidents, stuff like that. They're very Martian to me. Saturn's negative effects are pretty much the opposite. It's like they slow everything down and they restrict you. Saturn is a very binding energy. That's why it's often used for binding, right? And yeah, it just restricts you. It gives you that feeling of, oh, I can never move forward and like I'm not going anywhere. It's kind of the darkness of Saturn. So once you know this, you can easily pinpoint what's going on. Now, as I said, the Neptune, Uranus, and Pluto are not part of modern astrology. Therefore, they're not really part of planetary magic, at least not the old school stuff. And they don't have any angels that rule over them, but you can still keep them in consideration, especially when it comes to negative effects, right? Like Pluto, death, also painful transformation, Neptune, addictions, delusions, just being blinded or confused, lost. And then Uranus, again, can be kind of explosive. So I want to say about these planets that they're much more generational, right? So the ways that they affect us much more as a collective. But sometimes when something is aspecting one of these planets, then you could also keep that in mind, and there are other things you can do for that, and I'll explain that in the next video.